Welcome to another episode of InvestorPool, and happy Australia Day. InvestorPool is a carpool series that's all about improving your knowledge for real estate, finance, and even improving your income. Why I say that is because we get experts on in their particular fields, and learning from them could do that just for you. Today I bring on Nick Bendel, an experienced property investor, but also an experienced property and finance journalist. Why is that exciting for me? Well, today I get to interview the interviewer. Nick Bendel actually spends a lot of time interviewing other experienced property people in the industry and finance people in the industry too. Now the advantage of that is he's soaked in a lot of knowledge, and I'm looking to pass that on to you. Nick, thank you for joining me on another episode of InvestorPool. Appreciate you having you on.
Great to be here.
Look, I'm really excited because today it's not the norm. Usually I interview guests, but today I feel like I'm interviewing the interviewer, right? So I'm really keen to actually get people to understand, your story and how you got into the world of property and finance journalism, or as an editor.
Well, I'm a journalist and an editor by trade. That's what I studied at university. That's what I practice. And I originally started out in community journalism, but eventually made my way into business journalism, and then from there into property and finance, where I've been for the last 5-6 years or so. Awesome.
So over the last 5-6 years, you would have interviewed many guests. So this is just another interview for you, right?
It is, yeah. And as you say, interviewing the interviewer. Part of my job, which I love, is that I've interviewed thousands of people, a lot of really successful business owners where I've learned a lot, and also a lot of unsuccessful ones, and you learn a lot from them too.
That's interesting. And from, if we're jumping straight into the property space of the parts where you're, interviewing people, if you're thinking in the current environments that we're in, and from the recent interviews that you've done, what do you feel are perhaps some of the positives that are standing out in your mind from the things that you're picking up in your interviews about the property market in general?
I would say, now some people are seeing this as a negative, but the fact that our regulators have clamped down on credit, and look, there are negative aspects to that because good borrowers are being rejected, but I think the positive aspect of it is that it's maybe forcing lenders to be a bit more conservative and to get their books into better shape. And look, sooner or later, the credit valves will open again, and I think once that happens, our lending market will be in much better shape than if the free-for-all that had been going on for a few years was just allowed to continue.
Yeah, fair call. So on the point of credit, like you mentioned, it can be that two-way stream. Like, one is, it's great to have it as a safe lending environment, but then on the flip side, it's saying, well, not much money is flowing through. To the people who might be buying for their first time as an investment property, or perhaps new to lending, what do you think that is the simplest way to explain to them what the tightening of credit sort of does?
I guess maybe one way of looking at it, a few years ago, banks were looking for reasons to say yes. Now it almost seems like they're looking for reasons to say no. So if you're a new investor, you need to make sure that everything in your backstory is squeaky clean. So you need to make sure you're saving the maximum amount of money. You need to make sure your spending is minimized. If you don't, and you give the lenders a chance to say no, it really does make it hard to get finance and make the sort of purchases you want. That could force you perhaps to settle for maybe a cheaper asset or a lower quality asset. And if you don't if your first purchase isn't the right purchase, and you would know this, Arjun, given your expertise, that can really affect your maybe 20 or 25 year investment plan.
Yeah, it's actually a good point, and thanks for simply putting it together. And you meeting, I guess, different brokers in your field as well, and interviewing them, like, other than that, squeaky clean tip around what they can do, do you find there's any other standouts that you're noticing that, hey, that was a really great tip from someone that I met that could work for property investors out there?
Well, one thing I've heard from a few brokers recently, which didn't occur to me, but it sounds obvious when you think about it, is that lenders are now, they're very nervous about afterpay. Their feeling is if someone can't pay for a pair of shoes up front, should we really be giving them a loan? Now that person might very well be able to pay for the shoes up front, but for whatever reason they feel like it's a better way of managing their finances to maybe delay the payment for a little bit. But it's a really interesting tip from brokers, which is, don't give lenders the chance to say no. Don't give them the chance to misinterpret the way you manage your finances. So again, try to be as squeaky clean as possible. Try to present them with a picture of you as someone who is a responsible spender, a responsible saver, and that will give you the chance to hopefully get the maximum amount of finance.
Yeah, that's so important. And Afterpay is an interesting one. My brother, if you're watching this, get off the Afterpay. No, I'm kidding. But I found that it's actually such an important thing to consider, because sure, it may feel like, okay, it's a convenient thing to do, but its impact on what you borrowed, it's actually still what you spend, right? Whether it's in portions or whether it's the whole thing, you're still spending that money. So it's important to keep that as part of the budget, which is a great point you mentioned. And what I actually love, I'm not sure if many of the viewers know, but getting to know you over the time, not only are you that expert in that field of the property and finance journalism, but you actually have skin in the game. And that's one thing I love to share, where people who are commenting and talking to others about it, but you also took the move yourself to take action. What are some of the lessons you've learned over that time from purchasing investment properties that you might want to share to some viewers?
Well, just for the viewers, I've got a couple of properties that I've bought in the last 3 years, but before then I was so terrified of investing. I've always been a good saver. I'm relatively frugal just by nature, so saving has come easily to me, but for so many years I just had my cash parked in the bank because I was too scared to invest. I had all these what if scenarios. What if I lose my job? What if the economy tanks? What if interest rates go up to 19% like they did during the recession? What if? And that always held me back from taking action. But this was an emotional reaction. Once I forced myself to look at the numbers, the hard numbers, I realized, okay, look, I could lose my job. Anyone can lose their job. But if you have buffers in place, very conservative buffers, then it doesn't matter. You give yourself a lot of time to find a new job. Yes, interest rates could go up, but if you have very conservative buffers in place, you can afford it. And so once I forced myself to really think of it rationally rather than emotionally, I realized that I needed to take action. So that was one of the lessons I learned. The first one was really hard. I was so stressed and so nervous, and I had to force myself through. And I remember feeling sick during the loan application process and then the settlement process. But then once I'd finally gotten the loan, and once the mortgage repayments were coming out of my bank account and the rental payments were coming in, negative cash flow, but I saw that the numbers that I'd planned out were real numbers, and I realized that if I lose my job, if the economy tanks, if interest rates go up, I have such conservative financial buffers in place, I'm fine. And so I guess the big lesson I've learned is just take action.
Yeah. And did you notice from moving from the first one to the next one, it was a whole new ball game in terms of simplicity?
It was so much easier. Now that I understood the process, and I understood that a lot of my fears were irrational fears, there was so much less stress the second time round. I won't say there was no stress, because anytime big sums of money are involved, and anytime you're going through a loan application, which can be quite confusing, there's always going to be stress involved, but I would say 95% less stress the second time than the first time.
In the current market trends, credit was a big one you talked about.
Yeah.
With relation to price forecasts, I mean, it almost feels like the day of forecasting is kind of behind us a little bit. What are you thinking? Do you feel like it's still happening all over the place, or with the booms potentially here, or do you feel like it's come down a little bit? What are your thoughts?
Well, I love a good forecast as much as the next person, Arjun, but look, I have no idea what's going to happen to the property market, the share market, the Australian economy, and a lot of experts don't know either. Well, people get it wrong so many times. So I tend to take these forecasts with a grain of salt. I'm a big believer, though, more in the macro long-term forecast. So my feeling about Australia in general is that Australia in general is a great bet, because we are a very, very stable country. We have a stable political system. We have very stable and highly regarded institutions. I'm talking not just things like the RBA, but also our bureaucracy, which is very important. We are a country that is very peaceful, that has strong democratic institutions, and for more than 100 years our economy has grown year on year. Of course, there have been recessions, but if you look at the trends, year after year after year, we've been getting richer and richer and richer. So I'm very bullish on Australia as a country and as an economy, and I think over the long term, Australia is going to be one of the most successful countries in the world. But then breaking it down, this is where I don't have a good handle on things. So I don't know what different markets are going to do in the next year. I don't know what different asset classes are going to do in the next year. I just have a feeling that the Australian economy as a whole will do very well over the coming decades.
Finance trends. So I'm keen to jump back into that because the credit environment's an interesting one, and as we know, the impacts which we discussed off that earlier. Now, do you think from the Royal Commission hearing that's come on it recently, and perhaps the political environment ahead, what flow-on impacts do you think there are? Like, do you feel we're at a stage it's too tight, let's stop mucking around with this, or do you feel there could be some room for it to become even tighter?
I think it's possible that things could maybe get a little bit tighter. I think lenders, in particular the big banks, are feeling the heat, and they know that they probably need to be on their best behaviour, at least for a little bit. But I also know that recently the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, he's made some public comments about how he wants the banks to start lending again. I think the government's getting a bit nervous about the fact that lenders have become quite conservative. And because, of course, if loans aren't getting made, that can affect our economy. So while I wouldn't be surprised if things maybe do get a little bit tighter, sooner or later, I'm sure the wheel is going to turn and the credit taps will start opening again. When that will happen, I don't know, but I'm very, very confident that sooner or later it will happen.
And how do you think that's made you think about what your next move might look like personally? So do you feel that may get you to, sit back a little bit and survey the area a little bit more? Do you think it may make you go, look, I'm based on the long-term fundamentals and it's going to be okay, I'm going to pick out certain areas? Or do you think you try something different as a whole? Like, how do you personally see it for yourself?
That's a great question, Arjun, because we mentioned a few minutes ago that there are pros and cons to this tightening of credit. One of the positives I've taken from it is that it's really hit home to me just how quickly the lending environment can change. And it really reinforces the message that you need to have financial buffers in place, and you can't assume that lenders are always going to be just throwing money at you whenever you want. And you need to have your portfolio structured in a way that if at any moment lenders do make things a lot tighter and do become more conservative, that you're fine. So I guess what it's done, to answer your question, it's really hit home to me that I need to get my finances in order, and that I was actually tempted to make another purchase, but it hit home to me that if I did make that purchase, my buffers would be dangerously thin. And so I think this tightening, at least for me personally, has come at the right time. It's really sent home the message, Nick, just be conservative, understand that things can change at any time, and if things do change, you need to be positioned so that your finances aren't going to take a hit.
Yeah, I ditto on the importance of the buffers. I actually personally have a rule where if I don't have 3 to 6 months worth of repayments sitting in the offset account or the loan account where the repayments come out of for that property I just previously purchased, I don't even move on to the next.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure at least 3 to 6 months of any property that I own has its relevant repayments for principal. Even if I'm on interest, I want principal on the side. That really makes me feel comfortable to go, okay, I can move on to even start thinking of the next now. With some of the people that you've interviewed over your recent periods, what have been some of the most interesting comments you've heard on the property market or even the finance space that you feel would be valid to share?
I think one interesting lesson I've learned is, before I became a journalist, I've always been very interested in business and property and finance. And before I became a journalist and I saw all these successful people, I thought, to be successful, they have to know everything about everything. But once I started interviewing all these people, I discovered that they don't know everything about everything. They know a lot about a little.
Yeah.
And they focus on that. And then they have other people to fill in their knowledge gaps. So it might be colleagues or it might be professional advisors. And strange as it might sound, I've actually spoken to a lot of very, very successful people who, when you talk to them, they actually come across as idiots. They're not the sharpest tools in the shed, but they might not be tremendous intellects, but they're very good at certain things, and they know their strengths and their weaknesses. So I think if you convert that to an investing perspective, it really doesn't matter if you're not tremendously intelligent. It really doesn't matter if you don't have great knowledge of property and finance. I think as long as you understand your strengths and weaknesses and you have the humility to seek out experts, someone like you, Arjun, who's very knowledgeable about investing. I've been helped, for example, by a really good mortgage broker, Tom Hawley from Azora Financial. I'll give him a bit of a plug.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to another episode of InvestorPool. It was awesome having Nick on, and please do check out the episode on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram, and you can search up InvestorKit to find it. Have a good one.